Let's get started. Good? Cool. Thanks everyone for coming. This is not a large crowd compared to what we had, but tonight we are taping this for everyone to potentially watch. If you did not be able to attend any of the meetings that we've had previously, tonight's meeting will be taped and will be connected to the Pitkin OST Project's website. Do we have a way to put that on screen ever or not? But it's just pitkinostprojects.com, and you will be able to grab this from Grassroots TV. So we thank Grassroots for helping us record this tonight. So we're here to talk about the Carbondale to Crested Butte Trail. And so the Carbondale to Crested Butte Trail plan is a plan that's been in the works for a really long time. You can hit the next page. Uh-oh. So, that's okay. So, the thought of this trail started in the early 90s, and the county started to think about this connection from Carbondale to Crested Butte. Town of Crested Butte and Gunnison County, started working together truly in about 2004. The Scenic Byway, and the Scenic Byway goes along Highway 133 all the way from basically Crested Butte all the way to Carbondale, and the Scenic Byway was looking for a way to showcase its incredible beauty along this and to provide multimodal transportation beyond just a car on the byway. And they created a feasibility plan that got the juices flowing for this Carbondale to Crested Butte Trail, because it was showing the available public routes to make this a reality, and it was feasible to make happen. And so the town of Crested Butte started working from their side up Kebler Pass, and they've been moving for the last 10, 15 years on that side. And Pitkin County with Gunnison County, Pitkin County with Garfield County, and the town of Carbondale started planning the first phase from Carbondale out to the BRB which is the KOA campground now. And so in about 2004, the county applied for a GOCO grant for this big legacy grant to get this trail moving, but also do some really big purchases on conservation easements along the corridor along Highway 133. And that set in motion the first phase that went all the way to the BRB. And then after we completed that, we took a break. That took a long time to complete that first section. And so the county, through their Open Space and Trails Fund, has all the county to look at on trails. And we went away for a little while and did trails in other areas, always thinking it was going to be time to come back to the Carbondale to Crested Butte Trail. And in 2016, the governor announced this ambitious program, what is now called the Colorado 16. And this Colorado 16 was all around the state to identify critical trail components and critical trail connections and big regional trails. And one of the trails that was put on the list was the Carbondale to Crested Butte Trail. And then that set in motion the next phase of planning. The county, with Gunnison County, went for a planning grant from GOCO, which is your lottery funds. And they then got a $100,000 grant to start the planning for the Carbondale to Crested Butte Trail. Obviously, most people know the map. You can see the connections between Crested Butte and Carbondale. And so, the overall trail, I keep forgetting the exact number, but it's about 84 miles, plus or minus. Depends on which routes are used. And so, go to the next page. So in January 2017, Pitkin County started the planning for the vision overall, basically finding ways and what potential alternatives we can use to get from where the trail ends now at the KOA campground all the way top of McClure Pass. Gunnison County and the town of Crested Butte is working with the Gunnison National Forest on their side, and they're working through their final NEPA approvals and working towards volunteer projects and construction projects to get their side up towards McClure Pass. But in January 2017, Pitkin County started to engage the public on what the public would like to see with this trail. And so we started the public outreach in January, and then from that public outreach, we started collecting a lot of data on environmental and engineering. And through the summer, that data was collected. And then in the fall, in September, we started a whole nother round of public process to really get people's feedbacks on potentials. And that set off, a huge round of planning. We got over 560 comments on that plan. And we took all of those comments and then presented to the Board of County Commissioners. They read all of them, and we just give them a big packet of them. They read all the comments, and then they directed staff to what is to put into the plan that's here today. The amazing part was that with all the public comments, we worked with all our partners. And what we really found out that this trail is not just a trail, that the whole corridor needs some planning and needs some action items. And I'll get through that in a minute. But from January of 2018 to about March, we put together this draft that is now online and is available for people, and then presented it to the Board of County Commissioners and the Open Space Board in March and April. They adjusted it to what they felt was good to go for another public process, and on April 24th, released the draft plan that you see today. And then what we've been doing since then is we've been getting the word out. We have over 1,000 people on our email list now, and for this project alone, so we've gotten it out on that. We're going to be sending a letter out to the entire Crystal Caucus neighborhoods. We do Facebook, you name it. We try to get the word out to try to start collecting public comments on this phase. I have been doing presentations from Redstone to Aspen since May 10th and May 16th. I did one in Carbondale, and we're here today in Aspen. And then after this presentation in June, we're going to meet with advocacy groups and with our agency partners. We're already meeting with our agency partners. That's the Forest Service, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and CDOT. But we're also going to meet with some advocacy groups that want to discuss the trail and have questions. And so that'll happen in June. On June 26th in Carbondale, we're still trying to find the exact location where we can do this. But on June 26th, the Board of County Commissioners and the Open Space and Trails Board will have a public session where the public can comment directly to the Open Space and Trails Board and the BOCC. And that's on June 26th. And then we've been trying to provide a lot of time for the Crystal Caucus to formulate their comments. So they'll have a meeting. They'll have meetings June and July about this. And then public comment is due on July 27th. After that, we'll take all the public comments. We're going to give every single one we get to the Board of County Commissioners and Open Space and Trails Board. We're going to kind of compile the themes and everything else, give them a draft that they potentially can adopt. They will look at the draft, and they're going to basically take their time on the draft to then finalize that draft and adopt it. The reality is once this is a vision document. There's specific action items in this, but it really sets off a phasing plan for the next pieces of the trail. So in this plan, as I go through it, this doesn't say that the trail's definitely going to be here, definitely going to be there. It just sets off the next round. This creates the overall vision, and then we can get into the meat and details of creating sections over the next, this trail is phased out over the next 20 to 30 years. So it's going to take a while to get this thing completed, and it's going to take a lot more work. And so that adoption area will happen between August and September. Boom. You can go one more. So what we found out through the first levels of planning for the first 8 months is that there's so much more than just the trail. There's a lot of action items that need to be included that go beyond the trail. We heard a ton about wildlife. We heard a ton about trying to preserve and protect the bighorn sheep. We heard a lot about trying to make sure the calving areas and protections for the elk and the deer are there. There's a lot of action items. We heard from the Forest Service. There's a lot of restoration projects that they would like to complete along with Colorado Parks and Wildlife to really improve the habitat and everything. And so one of the best ways to start getting funding for this stuff is get it into a plan. So we put it into this plan, and this happens with or without the trail. And so these are action items for the corridor that happen without. So we've done things on biodiversity preservation and enhancement, recreational amenities, we have maintenance, management, enforcement, and outreach, and then we get into the trail alignments. So on the biodiversity preservation and enhancement action items, one of the big things we heard is, and what we're doing now, the county is working with Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the Forest Service. We've been working to restore habitats, specifically for the bighorn sheep. So we have been funding with the Forest Service the prescribed fires that are happening in Avalanche on Faloha. There was more planned for this year, but the weather got too dry too quickly, and the burning season, went away really quickly. We like to have snow up high so we can burn into the snow. The snow started disappearing pretty quickly, and it greened up so much that they were worried about the severity of the fire up to the snow. So that didn't happen this year, but we were already funding that this year. We're going to keep that funding in place to hopefully happen next year. There's a lot of other pieces of habitat that the Forest Service wants to look at over time. And so the county, we're proposing funding, and this will be included in budgets in the future. And so hopefully we'll continue to fund these projects with the Forest Service and Colorado Parks and Wildlife as we go along. One of the things we always hear about, and especially with the trail being so close to the Crystal River, is the Crystal River is a heavily impacted river. You had a road on one side, a railroad on the other, and it's been heavily impacted. There are areas that are in need of restoration, and we have heard from some environmental groups, the Crystal Valley Environmental Protection Agency, some citizens, Wilderness Workshop, Healthy Rivers and Streams, Rolling Fork Conservancy, the White River National Forest, trying to get together and convene a better forum to start getting those enhancements on a funding list and a priority list to see where we can impact the Crystal River the best, considering it's a pretty constrained river through a lot of those areas. Coal Creek is definitely one of those areas. And so that's on there. And then we also have a lot of wildlife monitoring. One of the things we heard from Colorado Parks and Wildlife and from the Forest Service is really learning about where the bighorn are lambing now. We know a lot of lambing areas in the past, but the bighorn sheep, the health of the herd has definitely declined, and it's mostly due to disease, and that needs to be addressed through stopping the interaction between the domestic sheep and the bighorn sheep. But that's going to take a lot of work with the current grazing lessee. But in the meantime, there's also habitats up there that might be in need of restoration. So we're proposing to put funding for the Colorado Parks and Wildlife and for the Forest Service to start doing that monitoring so we can help with the bighorn sheep and especially the lambing areas to see where they're at now. Next page. And then bighorn resiliency. I mean, really, truly, the county commissioners felt it really important to, because we heard it from a ton of public comments, was to really prevent the disappearance of the bighorn sheep in the Crystal Valley. And that herd is not doing well, and it needs help. And if funding's the problem, basically, county can help. But the cool thing is through this process, something that has been spurred, and it's going to help well beyond the Crystal, is this Watershed Biodiversity Initiative. And it was started by the longtime director of ACES, Tom Cardamone, and he is really getting together kind of the private side with the public side to really put together a whole watershed initiative on protecting biodiversity and habitat. And it really, that came out of this trail planning project because people were like, whoa, we're concerned about wildlife, we're worried about what this trail is going to do. And Tom's like, we got to look bigger. And the county totally agrees, we do need to look watershed-wise. Where are the conservation areas we need to protect? Where are the areas we need to restore? These are the areas we really need to focus on and find the funding together with the private landowners that protect a lot of the land that's around in Pitkin County and Garfield and Eagle and look beyond the borders. So that whole initiative is starting, and really, truly, part of the goal is to really create better health for the bighorn sheep in the Crystal, but also the health of wildlife throughout the valley, wildlife connectivity with the fact that we have Highway 82 splitting, Highway 133, how's the wildlife getting across? Can we facilitate better crossings? We're going to find out. So we're working with that watershed initiative to really get Colorado Natural Heritage Program involved, to really look at wildlife on a much larger scale throughout the whole watershed. So that's a pretty cool piece. Big thing is seasonal closures of potential trail routes. And seasonal closures is an area where we get a lot of questions on the effectiveness and where they are now, what's happening now. The reality is, what we have seen is if you could enforce them, they work. If you don't enforce them, they got problems. We had cameras out all winter on some of the areas that we have already open as trails now, and we were quite disappointed to see how many people were breaking through those closures. We found also that it was the same people breaking the closures often, so it was the neighbors. We've got to get the neighbors to respect the closures. They can help us keep these areas critically protected for wildlife. So in this, you'll see that we have specific action items to increase our enforcement staff, to increase the Forest Service enforcement staff, to really get these more effective. Then we do conservation easements, we do property purchases. We are going to continue to do that through the Crystal River Valley and in other areas. That's one of our big parts of our mission. Go to the next page. And then some of these things, we're going through the plan. I'm showing you what's in the plan so you guys can really go back to some of these areas, and if you want to read deeper into them, they could be there. And so, one of the things is the recreational amenities, the action items. People ask, where are you going to park all these people? Well, we put it in the plan in some of the places to show you the potential options for parking throughout the Pickens County area of the Carbondale to Crested Butte Trail. Pop the next page. And then interpretation is critically important. We started working on that at Elk Park, and we started putting some of the history and the natural history and the human history, really teaching people how special the Crystal River Valley is. We're going to continue that. Signage is always a big one because people want signs to tell people not to do this, this, and this, but people don't really listen or look at the signs, but they can detract from the beauty and aesthetics of an area. So you have to be really careful about making sure people know what they can and cannot do, but don't detract for such a beautiful area. And then one of the big things that came out of this public process was, if you're not determining, or it's going to take years and years and years to build some sections of this trail, that we really should be working with CDOT on widening of the shoulders, of beyond just separating a specific trail. We should be working with CDOT on increasing the paved shoulders on Highway 133. It's in the plan. We are going to do it. CDOT already knows that we're there. The problem is it takes time with CDOT to get on their long-range planning to get this, but that is going to be one of the big things that we do because, as you'll see, some areas we don't have a pavement type, really figured out yet. We got to work on it more, and so increasing the paved shoulders definitely creates a safety improvement in this corridor. And then one of the things we learned from the Forest Service is they're having significant issues of finding funding to upgrade and keep the Avalanche Campground open. Avalanche Campground is beloved by people in Carbondale and up the Crystal and all through Pickens County and other areas. And so one of the things we're proposing, they said it would cost about $47,000 to improve. So we're putting that number in there to hopefully get funding for 2019 to help the Forest Service improve that campground, keep it open, and manage it appropriately. Next page. And then we definitely got a lot of questions about how you're going to maintain this trail. How you going to, what are you going to do? We put all of that stuff in there. We show you how much staff and equipment we'll need over time because obviously this trail plans will be phased. Weed control is a big one. The Crystal Valley, we always try to take care of the little areas we have, but there are some major noxious weed issues on the National Forest. We're putting some funding in to help that. We found, the Forest Service definitely said, hey, if we could get this, we could do more contracts and we can definitely treat more areas. So we're hoping the BOCC will fund that and the Open Space Board in the future years to increase the weed control through the entire Crystal Valley corridor. Our typical management and regulations, and then enforcement staff. One of the things we really put in there as a funding thing is to increase the enforcement staff. And what we saw was the Forest Service is lacking any enforcement capacity in the Crystal Valley throughout the entire year. They have closures for dogs in Avalanche. They have, campgrounds, you name it. They have no enforcement officer to deal with that. So Pickens County has worked with the forest over by North Star, and we pay for the Forest Service to have a forest protection officer, and that forest protection officer then patrols areas, and actually we have solved some major parking issues because of that one person being out there solving it. And so it's been a really important and a really successful model, and we're looking to start doing that in 2019 with the Forest Service to increase the enforcement. That will also help us increase the enforcement of our seasonal closures. So we're really looking forward to getting that moving forward. An educational campaign partnership with CPW. a lot of people just don't know about the incredible resources in the Crystal Valley. And CPW was like, hey, we'd love to work with you on that. So we put that in there for funding to start in 2019 and continue for the future. So, and then another big one is commercial and special use permits. Because, you know, when you build a trail, people come and use it. But also commercial entities, special uses, want to use it too. You can't always control the amount of people that use something. You can control the commercial and special use that happens. We do it on every property we manage. Picken County does. We control the put in at North Star. We control the amount of people that can launch at one time. You can control if there's bike tours and there's commercial people who are bringing people to the top. You can control the amount of special events that you allow to happen. And through that, we want to work with the White River National Forest and CDOT to control that to a level that's acceptable. And that is in this plan to do. Next page. Now, I'll take a sip of water, but we're now getting to the specific trail alignments. And as I said before, the two pieces of kind of the action items for improvement of the corridor are separate from this, because we really want to make them happen no matter what. Even if the trail does not happen, you still want the improvements to the wildlife and everything else to go forward. So, but the trail alignment action items, what we have worked on is with the county commissioners, after they've received the hundreds of public comments, what we try to figure out is a phasing plan for a trail this big. This is really a more of a vision of what can happen with this trail over the next 20 to 30 years. And what the commissioners are trying to do in this plan is to phase it in a way, and to phase it where areas that got the most support to areas that we need more work on, and really look at this project in specific chunks. Because in the end, each chunk can be its standalone trail. In the end, if you only build, like when we built the first section, it's standing alone right now. It connects a community to Carbondale. People use it now. And so it's been standing alone for the last 7 years. It can stand alone forever. So we are proposing it in sections that can stand alone, that if you never build another section, it's still a trail. If, you know, the first phase you're going to see is Redstone to the top of McClure. Okay, if that one does get built and nothing else gets built, you got a Redstone to Crested Butte trail. And so, and that's fine, because they can exist on their own. A lot of these areas where you see, we're going to see not in the next, necessarily the first section, but as we move down the valley, there are a lot of sections that have no recommended alternative. What we've realized through the public comment is we don't have an alignment that everybody agrees upon. And so we put that in future phasing to work in smaller groups and try to see if we can come up with an alignment that works. And so as we go through it, there's also phases and also future sections. There are places where there's an alignment on private property. We say it pretty clearly, we do not have an agreement on all those pieces yet. However, you know, a lot of those phases are phase 7 to 12 to 15 years out. We're hoping that over time we can have a conversation with all those private landowners and see if something happens. If not, there is always another alternative, and that's always out there, and each section has that. So let's hit the first one. First one is, there's Redstone. I might have to go across and back. So you got Redstone, and so this is the castle, the Redstone Castle up here. And so from Redstone to, you know, about where Hawk Creek comes down, and that's over here, but the castle boundary is about right here. So this section is one of those sections where, you know, we've heard public comments both ways. You know, the reality is this alignment over here is the road to the castle. We don't have a public easement on that. We are working with the castle now. We may or may not get that. And we're, you know, right now it would be an amazing amenity from Redstone to grab it. However, this alignment, though it's along the highway, connects two subdivisions right outside. And so we did hear it from these two subdivisions that they would love to be able to have a trail to get back into Redstone, because right now all they have is a highway with a very small shoulder. And so this would be an incredible amenity on this. So in this section right here, basically what we're going to do is work on both. Like the recommended alignment in here is to potentially work on both and see if we can make both happen. If not, obviously this one's within CDOT's right of way, and this would be the alignment that is chosen. But see if we can get both. So these sections, everything from Redstone to the top of McClure is natural surface, either crusher fine, which is a crushed stone, or natural surface dirt, which is more of a single track, 3 to 5 feet wide on these sections. This section next to a highway would most likely be crusher fine and a little wider, so people feel comfortable getting into Redstone, be able to walk if you have kids and strollers or bikes with burleys or bikes and people, and so you can get back in there. And so that would be that section. From Hawk Creek, which is this section, there's private land in here. We do not have an easement. And then there's Redstone Ranch Acres, which is a public right-of-way through here. But we also have the highway alignment through this section. So there is no recommended alternative here. We need to work on both and see if we can actually make this happen. If we cannot get through this property here, this will remain along the highway and all the way to as we get closer towards Hayes Falls. Go to the next one. Cool. So you're gonna make me walk. I forgot. So Hayes Falls, this section over here where that, I think the number 60 says, that number there is where basically this corner on Highway 133 is really narrow. It's that red rock wall. So in this section, we're proposing to cross the highway in an area with very good sight lines. We put a lot of signage. It's a relatively safe area. It's a really safe area to cross. And we cross over to where a ton of people park at Hayes Falls. And that area where people park at Hayes Falls is an area that would have to be improved a little bit. And also, one of the danger things right now is there's no official crosswalk or anything at Hayes Falls. So we would propose to cross the trail back over at a place where everyone could cross back over who wants to visit Hayes Falls. And so that area has a recommended alignment because it's only in the highway. We don't have any other real alignments that are available in this section. So then we would get all the way towards, from Hayes Falls, we would get to an area where this is up by Bear Creek. And this is on National Forest land. And there's an existing single track there. It's not an official trail in the travel management plan for the Forest Service, but it is an existing trail it's an existing single track that gets used pretty significantly because the trail's in pretty good shape all the way through this section here. So this section is proposed as a recommended alignment to go through NEPA and the National Environmental Policy Act with the Forest Service to determine if we can turn this trail into an official Forest Service trail, and that would go all the way back to the highway right down, right past Placida, the Placida trailhead and the little curve in the road here. And so this is really where it go back to the highway. You can go to the next page. Because in Placida, we're going to stay on the highway. Placida will stay on the highway. It's really the only option available. The slopes on either side, trying to cross the river, is just really hazardous and it doesn't really get to where you need to go. So this would stay in the highway on Placida all the way to where the old road, the old McClure Pass Road takes off from Highway 133 currently. And the old road for the McClure is the same thing as Bear Creek. It still gets a decent amount of use. However, it's not in the Forest Service travel management plan. you can always hike and horseback ride on any section in the forest. You can't necessarily bike on these because they're not official trails in the forest, but if this is the section we're recommending that we go through NEPA with the Forest Service to use the B route all the way to the top of McClure. And at the top of McClure, that's where you get between Pitkin County and Gunnison County. And that's the big parking area at the top of McClure that gets heavy use in the winter and summer for Huntsman Ridge. A lot of people backcountry ski back there. But it also is where the Raggeds Trail takes off towards, as you go down towards Erickson Springs. Okay, going back to Redstone, and from Redstone, we're proposing to use the boulevard all the way to the north area. And in this section, what we're proposing to use an existing recreation easement through this area all the way to where you get to the edge of Faloha Meadows. This area on Highway 133 gets heavy mudslides. It's really narrow. It's really blown out in spots. And since we have a recreation easement, we're proposing to use that. We still want to work with the local residents in this area to see where where that actual easement always is located, make sure it's all going to work and everything else. This goes through the Forest Service, and then we would use this all the way to the edge of Faloha, unless we find another way to cross before we get to Faloha, which is an option and we will look for. But we would just use the edge of Faloha Meadows, the edge of the Grange Larson loadout. These are Pitkin County open space properties. We'd use the edge right next to the subdivision and then get back to Highway 133. We're proposing to use Highway 133 all the way out to Penny Hot Springs. And so Penny Hot Springs, obviously, we have seen a significant increase of use on Penny Hot Springs. And it's one of those areas that we have on our radar for next year to start planning to really update the Faloha management plan. Because one of the things we want to update is make sure that our current management of the nature preserve is doing what it's supposed to be doing. And then also working on what to do next with Penny Hot Springs, because as the use increases, there's obviously impacts that increase, and so we've got to start addressing those, figuring them out. It's not as easy as it may seem because the county doesn't own it all. The county owns pools of the hot springs, but with the survey, the CDOT owns most of the parking area. So we got to work with them on that to really work with them and see what we can do, and we'll start that planning next year. From Penny Hot Springs, I knew you were going to do that. From Penny Hot Springs, the recommended alignment is to cross the river at the hot springs and then go along the Narrows, which have two existing railroad corridors here. This area would have a seasonal closure. However, there is no proposed seasonal closure. This area has no seasonal closure now. The forest is fully open. We get a lot of calls every year because Faloha Meadows, for people who don't know Faloha, and why we heard the comments, stay out of Faloha, and we are. Faloha is only open 3 months out of the year. The surrounding national forest is open 12 months out of the year. So it's really hard for people to tell where or not you can go. We get a lot of calls on this, but that is open now. We would propose to work with the Forest Service to use this is to provide a seasonal closure and enforcement of it. And so we would go through this area because the highway in this area is extremely narrow, really difficult to construct. And the reality is this other side, you're so close to the highway here that if we enforce the seasonal closure, because the bighorn sheep do use this area, if you can enforce the seasonal closure, we can really, use this area, and because you have the big cliffs on that side too. Here, from this point on, there's no recommended alternative through this section. This is the old McClure Path. I mean, this is the old County Wagon Road. It goes all the way up and around. Obviously wanted to avoid both avalanche and the crystal flooding. So it went up, all the way up towards where the old campground was for avalanche and around. But what we found, our consultants with working with the Forest Service and Colorado Parks and Wildlife, is we need to do a lot more study before we would recommend using this alignment. We need to do a lot more study on wildlife habitat, wildlife use. We got to figure out the lambing areas up above. And before that, we're proposing to do a lot of that wildlife monitoring, and that'll be with or without the trail. But that will really help inform, which alignment to take. All bridge options, you see a lot of bridge options. We're not proposing to use all of them. Some of them are existing. There's an existing bridge at Avalanche, and every existing one has a little existing underneath. But these are options depending on what alternative you take. So there's also the highway alignment through this area. And then this is where you cross the bridge, the existing bridge, over to Avalanche. So go to the next page. So from this area, this is where we were before, potentially using that bridge if you're coming back to the highway, or staying on the old highway alignment through Janeway South. This Janeway is the old settlement of Janeway. It's an old mining area. And so this area, proposing to use this section or this. This alignment hasn't been decided yet. It really depends what happens before. But either way, we're staying on this side through Janeway North. This will be all on the highway alignment through Janeway North. This one area was basically from about here all the way down, is an incredibly biologically diverse area. It was one of the most highly diverse areas and least disturbed areas along this corridor in the whole area. And so we're not proposing any alignment on that side, that basically it will come back to the highway and go along the highway all the way to the Perham Creek Trailhead. I don't know how many people have hiked that, but the Perham Creek Trailhead is over here. And so this section would go all the way to this trailhead, and it would stay in the highway from this section or potentially this entire section. On to the next one. Okay, so we were coming on the highway here. There's a couple potential options based on where we want to go in the future. The reality here is there is a private property right here. We're showing the alignment because this is a really, really difficult curve here. We don't have an agreement now. This section, as we move down, I'll show you the phasing. This is at least about 10 to 15 years in the future. So can we work a potential deal? It's about 600-700 feet. It would save a lot of money, and we did not see a biological reason not to put it on this side. It's an old railroad grade. There's development over there. And then you get to Andrews open space. So we're proposing to use that to get out of this really narrow corridor here. And we're proposing to use that, stay on the forest through here, and then on the county open space either to bridge back, or if an agreement with the next subdivision, we would propose to potentially use that. There are options here. There are alternatives. We'll see which one comes available. As I said earlier, this is 10 to 15 years in the future of really even starting the planning of this. A lot's got to happen before we even get to this section. So, hopefully we can, if we're getting this way, then we will definitely be breaking down and doing really smaller outreach with the subdivision and the public at large to see, what really works through this area. Or stay on the highway, come through here. This is Red Wine Point. This is when I earlier said I was kind of disappointed with the compliance with the seasonal closure through here. This existing trail, it's open right now to the public. The public uses it, and we have a seasonal closure on it, and that is proposed to remain, used as the trail alignment. There's potential bridge alignment here. There's an existing bridge, but we also, if we don't get an approval through the subdivision, we have the ability to put one next to it. So this would be a recommended through Redwine Point, and then you get to the next section. And the next section, this is where you come out of Redwine Point. So there's an existing bridge right here, the Nettle Creek Bridge. And, this is another section right through here. This is there's no recommended alignment through here. This is still private property. We do not have an agreement to use. And so, can we work with the private landowner to potentially use B, which is the old railroad grade, or there's A, the option for A through here. And then you get to the Crystal River parcel. The county owns this. It's next to the many different subdivisions of this area. As I was reminded at my last meeting, there's many different types of subdivisions. We just call it Seven Oaks because it's Seven Oaks Road across the bridge, the existing bridge. So part of the subdivision is Seven Oaks, part of it's others. But, this whole section, there really is no recommended alternative. We've got to see how we're coming down before we get here. There's a lot of potential private property issues in this area. There's, this section is phased, almost 20 years into the future. So this section, we have a lot more to go here, which will dictate really where we go here, which really will open up future discussions with the property owners, and hopefully we can be working with CDOT at the time. And so let's see where it is. And as I said earlier, the sections from the Redstone to the top of McClure we're proposing as a natural surface, and it'll be either crusher fine or dirt. The sections from Redstone to right here, where the Seven Oaks subdivision, this is where the Crystal Trail stops now. The surface originally was proposed as an asphalt surface. The cost estimates that you see, the high range, they all have the asphalt. However, that decision is not being made now. The surface type is not being made. So it can be anything from a dirt path to what it is now, to a crusher fine, to an asphalt. And a lot of those decisions are going to be made in the future. A lot of those decisions, too, are going to depend on if we can really work with CDOT on widening shoulders in certain areas. So there's a lot of work that remains to be done as we continue, moving down this area. And the reality is these sections are phased out in the future. You can hit the next page. You want to pop that bigger? What? I can do it from this page. It's big enough. Yeah, just single view. Okay. So as I said on the timing was, go back to the, go forward one page. Okay. And the timing was really, if the commissioners adopt this plan the way it's written, the first sections would start basically, we say 2018 to 2019 would start, we would start getting into conversations with landowners. And we're already in some of them to see if it's even possible, but that's really what will start. And then in 2019, we'd really start the NEPA process, which is a whole nother public process. You got to go through the National Environmental Policy Act. We got a long process ahead of us to see if we can create the trails that are being used now but are not official, to make them official. And so we'll see if that is. So that's a segment for 2018, 2019. Go back. and then start the planning for the phases as you head down valley from Redstone. Start planning phasing, just the planning to start in 2020, and then as you see, as you get to the Penny Hot Springs and below, Penny Hot Springs 2025, all the way through, you know, the Perm Creek area, you're starting to get into 2030 as beginning of planning. These sections take time. We're also cognizant of the fact that the county does not want to spend all their time, all their capacity, and all the funding on one trail. Our mission is bigger than that, and so go to the next page. You know, this is a cost summary of the Open Space Fund. So the fund overall is in gray. The trail funding is, by charter, with the voters approved, is only 10 to 40% of the entire fund. The Board of County Commissioners with the Open Space Board have done an incredible job for the last 28 years making sure that we have plenty of funding, and the majority of the funding goes to conserving lands. And they want to maintain that over time.
Sorry about that.
Correct. Can you hear me? Can Grassroots hear me? Does it work? Am I good? Sweet. Is on the timing implementation. That's not construction. It's just to start the planning. Does that clarify it? Yeah, it's not construction timing. There's a lot more planning that has to happen in each section before we can get to building anything. Okay, so back to this. And so there's a range in the charter that the voters approved that a minimum of 10%, but a maximum of 40% of the fund will be used for trail construction, acquisition, trailhead improvements. And so as you put the cost for this project in, we have low cost estimates and then high cost estimates, and all the estimates we did, you know, they were really, what that says is an estimate. You know, we're hoping, you know, as we move through and get into more advanced engineering, that the estimates we can reduce down, but we're also proposing things way in the future, and we don't know what inflation's going to do. So the reality is these costs are, you know, kind of a, you know, an engineer's guess of what these things will cost. Also, the high cost estimate in some of these areas are for the asphalt trail. You change that surface to a natural surface, those costs come down significantly. You get grants, the costs come down significantly. So what we're looking at is obviously the first phases are more single track crusher fine sections, so the costs are relatively low. And as you get into the sections below Redstone, they can be low or high based on it. The thing is, what we're really showing is capacity of the fund. The reality is they can't go over it. So if by chance they choose the most expensive option, and you know, the fact that they're going to make it asphalt and everything else, if that's what's chosen, obviously we got to find grants, we've got to find partners, or we got to spread it out over time. And so, because we've got to stay under that line, and we also got to make sure that there's capacity for other projects. The commissioners have done an incredible job for the last 28 years. We've never hit the top amount, and we've built some pretty big trails in other areas. And so, you know, the commissioners have shown that they've been able to keep that and keep other trail options open. So obviously it's very hard to start planning for 2040, but the reality is trying to look at what the cost in the engineering have shown up so far, and also looking at the cost differentials there. So getting back towards the end of the presentation, I'll stop talking and I'll take questions, is really just reminding where we're going from today on. So today's May 21st, and so today we presented, hopefully he got it all on the video, so he gave me the thumbs up, so hopefully we can then post this on the website, pickinostprojects.com, and then on that website you can grab this presentation, but also we have a survey to try to get people's feedback. The survey has a lot of open-ended questions on it, so you can let us know exactly how you feel about anything and everything. The survey also breaks down by area where you're commenting from. So if you're commenting from the Crystal Valley in Pickens County, you can put it down there and they will know that you're in the Crystal Valley Caucus area. And when the BOCC takes all of those comments, they will be able to see on that comment, this is from the Crystal Valley, this is from a Crystal Valley person, and this is from another area person. So trying to find the demographics of where all the comments are coming from. And so the survey's live. We'd already been getting a pretty significant amount of feedback, and it's been really pretty impressive to see that people are getting out there. As I said, we have 1,000 people on our email list, so it's pretty impressive to see how many people are already responding. This plan is big, and the reality of this plan is to get to the action items, you go to page 190? 197. Because when you go to the table of contents of this plan, we put everything in the plan that we've done to date. So you're looking at, I got it right. So everything we have done to date. So all the study areas, the previous planning efforts, we did a socioeconomic summary, trail environmental surveys, engineering, evaluation criteria, the alternatives that we put in the first round, and all the planning process up to date. That's all in this plan. If you want to just get to the planning actions that I went over tonight, go to page 189, and that really has it all the way to the end of the plan and has all the things that I did tonight. So with that, I will say goodbye to Grassroots, but I'll stay and answer any questions that you guys have. So thank you.